Trafficking was something that P. Diddy was indicted of. All of his survivors, they all loved him. They loved him so much. Didn't you love him? But you loved him. Do you still love him? Of course, these women answering honestly were like, yes, of course I loved him. I loved him so much. Why would I do this if I didn't love him? Sex in exchange for basically having a privileged position in NXIVM was considered commercial sex.
When they found that deal with the woman in France whose husband had trafficked her in her sleep.
Yes. Oh, gosh,
and there was all these men in these chat groups of 70,000, sized groups. Narcissists and antisocial personality disorders do a lot of destructive things, but one of the really terrible tragedies is when trafficking is happening. What is trafficking? To define it and discuss the legal side of abuse, I'm being joined today by Pamela Takefman, who specializes in legal cases such as these. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Pamela Takefman. I'm really interested in talking to you. When your team contacted me, it was right around the deal with P. Diddy and what was happening with that case. In fact, it had wrapped up, and I know a lot of us were terribly disappointed, really quite crushed with the outcome of that. And tell me a little bit about your interest in the case and a little bit about you.
Sure. So I am the deputy head of sexual misconduct in spiritual communities practice at McAllister Oliverius, which is a mouthful, I recognize. And our group, headed up by Carol Murchison, we really take on spiritual communities, coercive groups, cults writ large, which is kind of a hot button word. And our clients come to us often after they've left, and they have been sexually abused, sometimes been subject to forced labor. We've had a number of forced labor cases recently, often as children. And where we were following the P. Diddy trial closely was having to do with the federal trafficking law.
Mm-hmm.
Now, trafficking was something that P. Diddy was indicted of, and that was part of the trial. And as you know, I'm sure listeners know, he was actually acquitted of that. And something that was one of the tactics of his team was to really focus on how much all of his survivors, they all loved him. They loved him so much. Didn't you love him? But you loved him. Do you still love him? Questions
Mm-hmm.
like that. And of course, these women answering honestly were like, yes, of course I loved him. I loved him so much. Why would I do this if I didn't love him? And I think that the trafficking law does, in effect, allow for a woman to have perhaps feelings for her perpetrator. And that doesn't negate it in a way. And I think, for our practice, we use the trafficking law, and I'd love to talk more about it, but I realize I've been talking a lot, so I want to give you a chance.
I was thinking about the fact that I think that's an issue that happens in all abusive relationships.
Yes.
Me being a survivor of abusive relationship as well as being a clinical psychologist, that's something I didn't understand when I was seeing patients, is that you feel very connected to these individuals. You long for their approval. You want their love and their support. But it doesn't mean that you're enjoying the abuse or you're even allowing or agreeing the abuse. You can be in opposition of it. Yes. And yet still want a connection to that person. And I think that distinction is extremely hard to understand.
Yes. Well, and especially I think, for us in our experience using this very potent law, the trafficking law, it has an interesting effect both, on clients or potential clients, to say to them, well, there's this law called trafficking, and it really takes into account the coercion you suffered. It uses the word coercion, which is very powerful and very potent. But it means that at the end of the day, you are going to be a victim of trafficking. And I think the other side of that is also when we, use it, the the sort of defendants in the cases, that the perpetrators or the organizations that enabled the perpetrators to exist are sort of like, whoa, 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 traffickers. I mean, and people have an idea of what traffickers are that is very strong. It's
Yeah.
it's taking people, throwing them in the trunk, bringing them across state lines, and that's not what it is. Because it could be within families. It could be, doesn't necessarily even have to do with state lines. It doesn't have to do with violence, physical violence. If I could take a step back and just tell you a little bit about the law.
Well, in fact, I'd like you to take even a step back further and
Yes.
say, what do you do specifically?
Yes, good question. Thank you. So we at McAllister Alvarius, we bring lawsuits on behalf of people who have been in subject to coercive control, and depending on what the kind of state of it is, was it a kind of labor scheme? Was it um, a sex cult? Was it a cult that everyone was celibate, and oops, the guru wasn't celibate after you were love bombed and isolated from your family and made completely financially dependent and emotionally dependent. Suddenly, you need to have sex with the guru in order to exist, in order to live, or your family would have bad karma for the rest of their lives, or your life would be over and everyone's life would be over. So we've brought several lawsuits. We are always happy to chat with more people who might be in these types of situations. I think it's kind of a growing niche. I don't know actually of any other lawyers who are kind of focused on coercive control and groups. And we kind of help survivors try to find some justice. I think it's whether the justice system can actually provide justice is a kind of other story, because in the civil system it's just money, and we've had a lot of situations in which it doesn't always feel good for our survivors. And
Right.
we understand too that sometimes even just speaking to us is re-traumatizing. They see our name in the email and they're like, "Oh God, what does she have to say again?" And I obviously I understand that, and I try not to be as re-traumatizing. Try to be as
Right.
sensitive as possible, but litigation is
Right.
very tricky. Very
So,
tricky.
how did you personally get interested in this?
It's a good question. So my background, I worked in a large law firm in New York City, and I come from working as part of New York. Large law firms have a real strong practice in pro bono work, and I worked with an amazing organization called Her Justice. I don't know if you've heard about it, which works
Mm.
with domestic violence victims and sets them up with pro bono attorneys. And often, my initial experiences with some of those cases was not that the women wanted to go to court, but that the men were trying to use the legal system as a way to punish them. And then, of course, so many of my clients were so resourceful and intelligent, and they'd sort of show up with these like extremely slick Wall Street lawyers, and the abuser would be like, "Oh no, 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 I don't want to do this anymore." um, but it was the my kind of background in working as an advocate for domestic violence survivors, I think, ties into this work in a major way, because it's it maps on very, very similarly, because even if the person who was, I sort of refer to them as a guru or a leader or um a master, even if they weren't a sort of boyfriend partner figure, it's the same kind of emotional abuse that happens. So yeah, so that's where I come to it.
So help us understand the trafficking law then, because you're
Yes.
right. My take of it is I end up thinking sort of like the coyotes who are
Yes.
gathering all the women up in lesser kind of struggling areas, and then they take advantage of these women, hoping for a better chance. And the next thing they know, they're somewhere they never thought they would be drugged up and then serving as prostitutes. So you're right. That has been my bias. So really, what is trafficking?
Well, so the way they kind of have opened it up is that what trafficking is when someone uses force, fraud, or coercion to, knowing that they are going to force the other person into a commercial sex act. And now how coercion gets defined is threat of serious harm. And serious harm includes psychological harm, reputational harm. It's very broad. That would cause someone in the similar situation to believe that they would be suffering. And it doesn't necessarily have to be bodily suffering. And then there's the other piece of it, which is commercial sex. Now, you think of commercial sex on the face of that, you're like, that's prostitution. But actually, that's been really opened up in recent times. So we have Harvey Weinstein, for instance, and the court ruled there that sex in exchange for example, meeting a director because you really want that part is considered commercial sex. It's sex exchange for anything of value to anyone. So in Keith Raniere's case, sex in exchange for being in a privileged position in the cult. I don't know how closely you followed. I was like really devouring Keith Raniere when it came out. This is before I worked for
Oh, you're talking about
McAllister.
that. Yeah, I do
Yes,
know because they made a
NXIVM.
TV series of it. Yeah.
Yes. Sex in exchange for basically having a privileged position in NXIVM was considered
Mm-hmm.
commercial sex. So it's really a kind of wide open, I say to you, if you have sex with me, you will be a prophetess. And that that's not true because that's fraudulent, or or if I say to you, um, uh, if you don't um have sex with me, like, in the afterlife, your all of your children will be sheep, and that's terrible because sheep are bad, something like that. That
Right.
is enough. And a court will look not just to kind of how regular person would think about that, which is, oh, that's kind of crazy. Of course, you'll never believe that, but we'll take into account all the circumstances. So if you've, for example, grown up in a cult and all you know are that sheep are the Antichrist, you would say, wow, like, I definitely had to continue to have sex with them. Otherwise, the psychological harm would be so great. And so it's really a dynamic law in that way. And I think, for us, we get so much, because so many people calling us. I think the law often, the law has a kind of magic cutoff at 18. And they say, as soon as you're 18, everything you did was like completely knowing, and you got yourself in this situation as an adult, and good luck. We have people calling us and they're like, my aunt gave all of her life savings to this guy, and how do I get it back for her? And it's like, well, like, was it a gift? Yes, it
Mm.
was a gift. And it's, the law doesn't kind of take into account these coercive principles often. So that's why I think trafficking is really revolutionary, in that way, because it does sort of say, okay, let's think about the actual scenario that this adult has landed themselves into, and not just assume that everything they do is completely sound, because people could just get themselves in positions because they're vulnerable. Anyway, I've been
Yeah.
talking a lot.
Yeah, we don't realize that we are needy, that emotionally we're psychologically, we're psychologically needy, and that we want to belong, we want to be chosen, and we want to be loved. And even the threat of existential kind of like abandonment is a form of annihilation. And we will do a lot to avoid any form of isolation like that.
Yes.
Yeah. And I was thinking lately, I was listening to you, I was thinking about the dating apps and how even there's kind of this fraudulent behavior that's occurring where people will say, I'm looking for a relationship. No, they're actually looking for a hookup. They'll misrepresent themselves in order
Yes.
to have a chance with you when they know that you're not looking for that. And that we've kind of have a culture where it's like, if I can get away with it, and in my mind, I don't think I've harmed you by my definition, then it's kind of permissible.
Yes. Well, and I think, I think you could really catch people at a time where they're really vulnerable. And I think so often, we're chatting with people that, it's really just you catch someone when I've had clients when they were caught just when they lost a loved one or when they broke out of a relationship or, I remember I left college, I followed a boyfriend to England and I did a master's degree and that was great. But, another person followed their boyfriend into a cult and, what to say was one thing, maybe I would have followed my boyfriend into a cult if he was going to a cult, so
Well,
it's,
yeah. I do think they target. I do think that there's an intentional targeting that's occurring. I mean,
yes,
I met my ex when I was widowed, and
yes,
I had on the dating app that I was widowed, and he even admitted that he was searching for widows.
wow,
Yeah, so there was a specificity to his intent.
yeah,
Now, the other thing he was looking for was somebody with life insurance.
yes,
So yeah, there
oh,
there was also that was going on too. So there was definitely there was look. I think there's people that look for these big transition moments. You
yeah,
moved across the country. You recently, like you said, maybe lost a job, or you lost a loved one, or maybe you're in a totally new stage of life, like
yes,
you've left college and you're moving into adulthood.
yes,
These are really big transition points that make us vulnerable to people who are powerful.
yes,
And I think also sometimes hardship makes us extremely vulnerable, and that we're willing to, we might not ask the right questions when we meet somebody because we're hoping that this is a dream come true.
yes,
I'm thinking of P. Diddy. I mean, how many people did he take advantage of because he offered a pipeline of a big chance, a real opportunity, and they
yes,
saw it as rejecting him as rejecting the dream, and
yes.
that was too great of a loss for them.
Well, and I think similar, for a lot of our groups, P. Diddy was this sort of, you know, um, cabal of people around him that who really pushed this idea that no, listen to him. He knows what's right. He'll set you up for life. Just do what he says because you have to. There's no not doing what he says. And it's,
Hmm.
sometimes these people serve as a kind of gut check, and it's like, am I really supposed to do that? And they say they basically tell you to ignore your gut. They
Yeah,
say,
they normalize it.
yes,
They normalize it.
yes. And I found,
Yeah.
so many of my clients would tell me that they would be physically sick, that they would know that what was happening was wrong in their bodies, but sort of, able with their mind to kind of swat it away, and in part because, yeah, the whole system kind of serves to tell them a different message, basically.
Yeah, yeah, and it's even fascinating why that system does that. Have you heard of Jennifer Freed's work on betrayal blindness?
Oh no.
Yeah, she did research on this and found that for sort of large psychological reasons, we often will literally become blind to certain pieces of information in order to protect ourselves from the truth of the reality. And when I listened to that case and those individuals around P. Diddy saying, no, it's okay, this is the only way, I wonder if there's a level of them that they couldn't see it, because if they saw it, then they'd have to do something with it, and that would put them in conflict with themselves, which is just too great.
Well,
There's
and
an
yeah,
yeah,
sorry.
there's an example in the book where this woman's partner was picked up for child, and in their home they had literature on the center table of immature literature. And the detective said to the wife or the partner, "What do you think of this?" And is her perusing through the images, and she goes, "I don't know. He just has this out here. I know it's, maybe it's." She's kind of like brushed it off as not a big deal. I know. And later he circled back like a year or so later and said, "What did you think of that?" She goes, "I don't know how I could not see. It was so inappropriate."
Right,
yeah, it was right in front of me. It was so inappropriate. But I know for me that there was when I was, so I know you don't know, but my ex was a serial cheater, and he's a sexual predator, to be honest with you. And he's just gotten away with it because he's, of course, targets adult women. And, and he's very smooth at what he's doing. So,
yes.
but early in that relationship, I had several times when my gut said something's wrong. This isn't feeling right, tracking right. And I wouldn't even know why I would feel that. I would just feel these feelings.
Yes.
And yet because it's so easy to dismiss it when everything looks okay,
yes.
or everyone around you says he's okay or they're okay.
Well, and if, in the cases of the cult, I think sometimes too, it's everyone in the group looks a certain way, acts a certain way. They're all believing in it. And I think, there's also the sort of perpetrator victim sort of, doubling, right? So sometimes someone who is enabling, was themselves or is themselves also a victim. So it's a little bit tricky,
Right. They may be the victim of that person, which is why they're going along with it.
Right.
So what is it, do you think, as the public generally, in addition to the fact just that the definition of trafficking has been broadened, what else do you think that we just don't understand about trafficking in general?
Well, so I think that it is talking about relationships, having it within a family that's actually, it's almost like what we thought about not that long ago about within marriage. That's you can't be within a marriage, right? And the idea that you cannot be trafficked within a marriage. That those two concepts of marriage and trafficking, or a relationship and trafficking, just don't go together because what, of course your trafficker is not also a love object, but I think at the same time, I think about the case of Keith Raniere and how much these people idolized him, just thought he was.
They thought he was the smartest man on earth.
Smartest man on earth. He called himself Vanguard. And so the sex with him was, or, the branding and the sort of extremes, I don't know if in your work you find this, but in my work at McAllister Oliverius, it's sort of like, sometimes I find with these guys, it's like, they didn't wake up and start with the branding. If they would have started with the branding, it's like, you start with the branding, you're probably like, I don't know, no, I'm not going there. But, it's almost like they sort of say, okay, I'm going to try this. And what about that? And I'm going to sort of keep pushing the boundary, and seeing how far they could get with that person. And suddenly it's sort of like, yeah, you have, a sex call where everyone's branding.
I know, or really bizarre behavior. Here's the thing, though. I worry. I worry this is what's going on, because this is what I saw my ex doing, is that he researched stuff. But some of this wasn't just naturally his own idea. He saw other people doing it, thought it was a great idea, thought he would try it. Yes. And then, he's pushing the boundary too. Yes. So I wonder if that's, is Keith that smart to think about all these things? I don't know. Yes. But who's to say where the human mind's going to take you? But I do think there's what I'm also bothered, like, for example, when they found that deal with the woman in France whose husband had trafficked her in her sleep.
Yes. Oh, gosh,
and there was all these men in these chat groups of 70,000, size groups. Is that, look at the degree of communication that's going on, and the sharing of stories that's going on. So it's almost, to me, it's like they're grooming each other on how to become worse at what they do. So sometimes I don't even necessarily think that they're that brilliant, but they're just that sophisticated at knowing how to get good information. I mean, if you think about it, if you're a bored person, this is the antisocial personality disorder, is insanely bored because they're an empty person. Yes. And you get off on hurting people, then you're going to do a lot of research in directions that are pretty crazy.
Yes. Well, but and then, in thinking about it in the positive light, and I think about this about my clients all the time, all it takes, because we sort of talked about, you could have these kind of really crazy people. We could have their enablers who are sort of like, okay, yes, I'll go along with that. I'll go along with that. But then all it really takes is one person to really trust themselves and be able to get out and to speak up, and how much that really speaks volumes. That woman in France, Pellico, I think about, I have a client who also thinks about that sentence about turning shame around and how powerful that is. I think, for all your listeners who I know are probably listening to this because they're trying to change their lives, they're trying to heal themselves, that bravery, you could have all these people who are really, who have taken a certain type of extreme, and you can say, I'm not going to do it today, and I think it's really, it's really hard. It's hard to come forward. It's hard to speak up. I think of so many of my clients who've put their lives, in a litigation. You have to give your adversary your medical records. You have to really, discovery in this country is really open, really revealing, and they do it. They want justice, and also because they want to be someone who helps other people, who helps pave a way. So
right.
That's what the positive is.
I was a survivor of pretty severe sexual abuse as a toddler. And I remember owning the shame myself for a very long time. To even bringing it up would make me shake and get teary and all sorts of stuff. And I was watching Dexter season 5 around the story of Lumen and his rage over her being, it was a gang rape is basically what she experienced in that I realized that he would have been enraged around my situation, that it was that it was, I was not in charge of my life. Other people were in charge of my life, and they made really, really bad decisions. And at that moment, I felt like literally the shame that I experienced internally became like a mantle, like a cloak. Yes. And I could feel it literally slide off. I could feel it like, this isn't mine. I didn't ask for this. Yeah. I didn't contrive of any of this situation. This was something that just that happened to me. Yeah. And it really was for me extremely empowering. But yeah, that woman in France, I just thought, way to go. I just thought the bravery of her was incredible. I think Cassie's testimony was incredibly brave to be in that courtroom day after day, staring him down.
8 months pregnant. 8 months pregnant. She was, and I, when that verdict came down, I felt for her. I feel for women of color everywhere who feel that they're not being believed. But, all it takes, I think, are a few people to really say, a lot of us believed her.
We all believed her. Yeah, I think an enormous amount of us believed her. Yes. And in fact, that was one of the things as I saw outpouring right afterwards was, we believe you, Cassie. Yes. Yeah. What you went through. We understand. I mean, even that tape of the hotel, like where it was brutal. They were brutal. So, let's jump over to the podcast extra and talk about if someone thinks they're being trafficked, what's the first steps they should do? What are the criteria even to consider? Let's just kind of break it down in a very practical sense. But how can people find out more about you or contact you if they're interested?
Sure. So I would head over to mcolaw.com, and that's our firm's website. Chat to, click on my bio. It's Pamela Takefman. You could talk to Carol Murchison also, who is our incredible, she's known as a cult warrior, cult slayer, but our work isn't limited to cults, and we kind of understand a lot of the dynamics over there. So happy to chat if anyone would like to.
All right. Thank you so much, Pamela. I really appreciate this discussion today.
Thank you.
Well, that's a wrap for this week's episode. Are you following me on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube? You can find me at Kerry McAvoy, PhD. Or you can learn more about me and my resources, such as the Toxic Free Relationship Club, at kerrymcavoyphd.com. And I'll see you back here next week.